Can we get to the slides where it says archetype? So, can everybody see this? You can read it. It's not too small. So this is how I built my life in the church that I pastored. I think everybody needs to come to a place. We're all a product of something. You know, I accepted Christ when I was 5 years old. My dad, my family, I think this was a God thing. We moved. My mother was Christian Science, didn't go to church. This was in 1950. I was born right at the end of World War II. My dad was kind of a card-carrying heathen, smoked 2-3 packs of cigarettes a day. One of my earliest memories is my dad and my uncles pouring beer down my throat when I was a little kid. One of my other earliest memories was my first friend in the world was black, which was a real blessing. My second friend in the world was Japanese, 5 years after the war. Chicken Ki Shioshi ran a little corner grocery store. And they actually invited my family over for dinner. And I know that even in Japan, I spent a lot of time in Japan, Japanese people don't have friends in their houses for dinner. So that was a pretty big deal because those guys had been on opposite sides 5 years before. So my first little girlfriend was Lori Shioshi. And I saw her again when she was 18, and I was glad we never hooked up. But anyway, so we had moved to this house where I met the Shioshis, and there was a Methodist church across the street, and this church had gone extremely liberal. And I never saw a church before. And the building was intriguing. And so I asked my mom what it was, and she explained Sunday school and all that. And so I wanted to go. So my dad walked me across the street. And if you came 3 Sundays in a row, you got a little mirror with a picture of Jesus on the back. And the second Sunday, I'm on my way now to getting that mirror. The second Sunday, my dad found out that guy didn't believe that the Bible was the Word of God. And my dad, who wasn't an atheist, but he was certainly not living for the Lord, got so mad at that guy. And I remember them standing on the sidewalk yelling at each other. And I was a little kid, and I'm looking down at the ground thinking, I'm not going to get that mirror. Well, I got a lot more out of that because my dad got the mumps. Our whole family got the mumps. And my memories of that are that I gave my little sister a haircut, like right here. And I got in a little trouble for that. And my dad somewhere got this thing that would fold out like this long and about this wide. And it was printed with red and black writing. It was all about a bunch of scriptures. And he would every day, while he was sick with the mumps, because men getting the mumps is pretty serious, and he's laying in bed listening to J. Vernon McGee. Do you remember him? The Bible says. You know, when I started pastoring, it turned out to be just a hippie church. But most of those kids were just addicted to J. Vernon McGee. He was so good for so many people, that man. But anyway, at the end of 2 weeks, my dad dragged me to a Youth for Christ rally. And in Portland, Oregon, that was a big deal. They'd have like 2,000 people at those rallies. And they had a little room where you could walk forward to accept the Lord, and you'd walk in the room, and they'd pray with you and whatever. Well, my dad took me in that room, and they thought he was a Christian man bringing his little boy. And somebody pulled me apart. My dad had to go ask somebody to pray with him. But they prayed with me, and I actually accepted the Lord. And then I just became the worst hypocrite that you could imagine. You know, I would go to, when I got in school, kids are telling dirty jokes, and every Monday morning, I've been in church all Sunday, and I'm not going to get into this stuff. And by noon, I'm repeating the jokes. And I was in a denomination. I was pretty certain I was going to go to hell by about 11 o'clock on Monday. And at 8:30 p.m. the following Sunday, I would get saved all over again. And so Jesus had a window between 8:30 p.m. Sunday and 11 a.m. Monday. I'm going to heaven. Otherwise, I'm going to hell. And then when I was about another year or so into this, my dad now is really getting, becoming a Christian. My mom threatened to divorce him, all that. And then about 2 months in, she accepted Christ, and she became the sweetest little lady you ever met. But one day, my little brother, who I was 6, when he was born, so I'd be 6.5 maybe. And he was bellying, making a lot of noise. And my dad said to my mom, with lungs like that kid ought to be a preacher. And then he said, I really hope one of my boys grows up to be a pastor one day. At that moment, I knew, and I hated it. And how I know that is I was so angry. Just a little kid. But I was wise enough to know that anger inside of me meant that I was the one. And so I just lived this really hypocritical life all the way through elementary school. I was the runt. I was young for my class, and I was the runt, and I was picked last for sports. So I decided I was going to have the filthiest mouth of anybody in school, and I did. And I still struggle with that, by the way. And at age 14, I was walking down the sidewalk outside the Portland, Oregon Foursquare Church, and I see, at age 14, I would have been, that would be 1959, and I see a yellow 1952 MGTD. Some of you know old cars, British sports car, go down the street, kind of raggedy, and a guy named John Myers, 19 years old, driving it. And I prayed, God, make him keep that car till I'm old enough to buy that car. And right around that time, our youth pastor got us doing this kind of dorky thing called teen tune-up time. And it was they give you a little scripture to read, and then you'd write down your prayers and whatever. And I bumped into Psalm 37. And it says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the 1952 MGTD of your heart. I had a second conversion experience. It was at that point that I decided I'm going to make God first in my life. Now, I think I was saved before, but I got serious. And I was 14. 4 years later, John bought another car, and I was brokenhearted. I had put all this time into Jesus. I had been in, this will sound stupid, I'd been in 2 Bible quizzes. I memorized the Gospel of Mark and 1 Peter for one of them. The following year, I memorized the Gospel of Matthew. And John got another car. And then I found out that he saved the MG for me because he heard that I'd been praying, and he saved the car for me. That's my story. What's yours? You have one. You have one. And you need a theology. So what I'm about to present to you has nothing to do with Psalm 37 other than that I'm deadly serious about Jesus Christ because of a stupid old car. But God uses things. But these are the scriptures that I have built into the church. And in my mind, it may not be in your mind, I'm not trying to argue with anybody, They are the archetype. I don't mean prototype. Prototype is we're going to test this out, and if it works, we'll build more of them. Archetype is let's go back to what was the original thing that was given to us. So I see the Bible, I'm going to go very quickly through this. The goal of the church, so an ecclesiastical archetype, the goal is not to build churches or build big ones. It's to make disciples of every ethne to the ends of the earth. Two scriptures, Matthew 28, 17 to 21, Acts 1, 8. Here's some things I want to point out about that real quickly. Everybody quotes Matthew 28, 18 to 21. Look at verse 17. He assembled the disciples after the resurrection, after he ate food with them, after all of this, after Thomas put his hand in the hole in his side. However, some doubted. It says that. So the people he gave the task to included some losers. And I think we need to be really careful that we're not canceling people out and disqualifying people from ministry because Jesus didn't. And evidence shows that every one of them, including the doubters, took the gospel to the ends of the earth. The second thing that I want to point out is that when it says nations in Matthew, it's not talking about nations that we see nation states. It's talking about people group. The word ethne that gives us ethnicity in its original form was not, the Pharisees were an ethne. The publicans were an ethne. The lepers were an ethne. Bikers are ethne. Surfers are an ethne. There's a commonality that causes them to bond with each other. And we get one of them in our church, and we feel like, hey, this is good, man. We're reaching surfers for Jesus. Or we're all Asian, but we got one African American. We're multi-ethnic. I was in a black church of 1,200 people in Savannah, Georgia, and a guy had been telling me about how multi-ethnic the church was. There were one married white couple in that church, 1,200 black people. And have you guys noticed, what is your name, sir? Joshua. Have you noticed the color of Joshua's skin? Have you noticed that nobody else has a similar complexion in this room? We are not reaching black people. We are reaching Joshua, who's probably reaching some black people, but we're not doing a real good. Now, I'm not being critical. I'm just saying let's just look at reality. If I'm a pastor and I got a black person in my church and I'm going, hey, we're doing a thing here. No, how could I make friends with that person so he could disciple his friends? And how could I set him up? How could I dumb down what we call church? When I say dumb down, we make it, you got to have a building, you got to have a salary, you got to have gone to seminary. How many people have we cut out of a calling in their life? When we went to Hawaii, we started churches really fast because there were a whole lot of people that weren't white, who hadn't gone to seminary, and who were old enough that they weren't going to go to seminary because they got a wife and 2 kids. But they had a call in their life. And we said, come, relate with us, hang with us, let us teach you, let us coach you, and then go reach some people who look like you, who think like you. Because it's more important that they think like each other than that they look like each other. Am I making sense? And so we were able to start some fisherman church. I mean, in Hawaii, very quickly we noticed we had these things, home groups we called mini church. You got all the liars together, and they bragged about the fish that they caught. And then you got other liars together, and they bragged about the big waves that they caught. But what we found was, if we can disciple a person who has natural, and how do you know a person's a leader? Because we ran him through a class? No, because people follow him. Whether he went to a class or not, that's a leader. because they got a follower. They may be a bad leader, and they may be a rebellious leader, but you should get to know them because they're a leader. And you could get to their kind of people. And so I think that it's important that we understand that ethne deal. I also think it's important that we look at Acts 1:8 and we realize Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And I when we would plant a church, we would always tell every pastor, pray that you meet somebody who has some relationship with another country, and that's your country. For us, in Hermosa Beach, we knew we were supposed to reach 1% of the population of Hawaii in a decade. It took us 11 years. We prayed for a secondary mission field. The Lord spoke to us, Japan. We felt honored that the Lord would call us to Japan because it was such a hard place. And I'm still working with Japan. I'm going there. I meet with my friend Fumi every other week. But it's still a hard place. And so we would just tell everybody, pray that you'll meet somebody that you can become friends and they can become the pathway into someplace else, you know. And so the Lord opens doors. Second thing is believer priests. Peter and John got arrested for healing the lame guy, and then they noticed that they were ordinary, unschooled men. Let's not hold people out of doing ministry because they haven't been to a school someplace. Here's what I believe. We'll train you how to be a pastor, and then you can go to seminary or Bible college or whatever, and they'll make you a better one. But I went to a Bible college, and you know, one of my friends did a PhD at UCLA, and he did a study on Bible colleges and their impact on America, and it's pretty profound. A lot of the major universities started out as a little Bible college, sometimes started by one church. But the truth is, 95% of the people who enter a seminary or a Bible college will not be in full-time pastoral ministry 2 years after the class graduates. We graduated from when I went to school, we graduated 88. 2 years later, there were 16 of us left. Here's what that means. Think about this. And I'm not down on Bible college. I think they're great. I just think we misuse them. Is you got kids who are 18 years old who could study to be an engineer or to be a lawyer or to be whatever else, and they spent 4 years going to a Bible college, and then they found out that they weren't a pastor. And now what do? Because they're married and they got a kid. They ain't going back to college. We wrecked their lives. We wasted their time. But if we would make you a pastor, train you how to do that in the local church, and then we send you to school after, help you go to school after, well, then we've done everybody a favor. We've done the school a favor. We've done the student a favor. We've done ourselves a favor. Anyway, assumptions. Romans chapter 15, verse 14. We don't trust people enough. Paul wrote to the church of Rome. Do you remember chapter 1? He apologized because he hadn't been there yet. Chapter 16, he writes to this hodgy-podgy little mess that's the church, meeting in different locations, different households, some slaves, some rich people. In Romans 15, he says to them, I am convinced, dear brothers, and it would include sisters, that you yourselves are filled with righteousness. That means I trust the Holy Spirit in you. That you have all knowledge, which meant that they had the scriptures, which at that time were just the Old Testament and a few letters. And that you're able to teach one another. That's confidence that we do not place in people and that we should. Am I making sense? Here's another thing. When I talk about dumbing things down, 1 Corinthians 14:26 describes church meetings. They're small. When you come together, and here's the key words in that verse, each one has a psalm, has a hymn, has a scripture, has a teaching, has something to share. That meant that a church of 6,000 people maybe isn't even a church. We'll talk about that in a minute. Maybe it's just a meeting. But a church is where people interact with each other. And then you get people like me who come up and we're supposed to have communication, sharing time, and I do all the talking and say, I'm working against us. Ecclesial minimum. And this is where it becomes difficult for some churches. Some people, when you start to say, what's the ecclesial minimum, they're going to say, well, you're talking about what's the least you can get away with and still call it a church. No, I'm going to say just the opposite. If you don't have these three things, you are not a church. So, you need to have worship, and I think worship has to be defined in Romans 12. Present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. Singing songs can be worship, but it is not the definition of worship. I was in a church not too long ago where all the, quote, worship songs were about me, 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 me. I'm going to church now. The first day I walked in, and I left that church because of that, by the way. I go to church now where it's about God. What I heard this morning up here was about God. I love it. And so, but singing is only a little tiny part of it. Worship is about my tithe. It's about how I live my life. It's about how I relate to my children. It's about all these things. So worship, if we don't have that, if we don't have, and I like this word communitas, because it's really talking about not what we call community, but functioning community. If we don't have that, then we're not a church. So some of the churches that are the most famous in America would not qualify as a church according to the minimal ecclesiology. Or some of your churches that you came here maybe not feeling so good about because they're so small and they haven't, only got 50 people. And, I talked to one guy this morning and I'm kind of looking at you guys and you go, well, we're new and there's only 50 of us, but, well, thank God that you're there. You're doing stuff that somebody else isn't. And I'm excited. But the guy down the road with 6,000 people that has no opportunity for people to fellowship with one another, I'm not going to call that a church. One of the things that we've had to learn in Exponential is we're not teaching you to go out and start an event, because Sunday morning is an event. We're teaching you to start a church. A church is a relationship. How do we build that relationship with people? And then mission. If there isn't mission, it's outside of us. If our goal is to get big, that's not mission. If our goal is we're going to have 10,000 people in this town, that's not mission. Mission is we're going to permeate this community with the gospel. We're going to get into the, one of my friends, I am a good Bible teacher. I'm not teaching the Bible. You have no idea. I am a really good Bible teacher. And I was up there in Kaneohe, Hawaii, 2,000 people a week coming, hearing the Bible teaching and all that kind of stuff. Less than a half a mile away, Sven Anders was down there in his little auto garage, 2-bay auto garage, 150 feet down a skinny driveway. He'd have to push cars in and out so he could work on one while he was waiting for parts for another, all that. Every Tuesday morning, he would push the cars out, and he would hold church. And there were drug addicts. There were homeless people. They were just hanging around. There was only about 8 of them. He had brought every one of them up there to hear the great Ralph Moore expound the scriptures. And they only came once. We had a radio broadcast. I was on the radio 15 times a week in Hawaii. We paid for 10 of those. So I was on the morning broadcast and the afternoon broadcast. They were just sermon cuts. But then the radio station came to us. AM radio was dying, right? And they go, we'll give you 9 o'clock at night slot for free because we like you. Because they got to do something with it, right? So we went on at 9 o'clock. And I was already getting letters from the prison because guys in the jail were listening. And one guy, and I would answer them. They write on yellow lined paper. I would write back on yellow lined paper. I wouldn't use church letterhead. And they would write with pencil. I would write with pencil. I'd answer those letters. These guys that come out of jail, they come straight to our church once because they didn't fit. We were middle class. We were extremely multi-ethnic. I made sure that the worship bands, because that's, if you walk in, you're looking at who's up front, and you're going, do I fit here? And if you see somebody like me up there, you go, I fit. If you don't see somebody like me, you don't think you fit. So we were very multi-ethnic. We're also very middle class. We didn't have any rich people, and we didn't have many poor people. And we certainly didn't have many people coming out of OCCC. So that the guys coming out of OCCC come one time, and that's it. Until Randy Ishida, who had been a bad boy biker at one point in his life, actually had ridden with the Hells Angels. I was not allowed to say that while he was alive. But after he was dead, he didn't have to fear them anymore. Randy started in a coffee shop a church for guys coming out of OCCC. And they multiplied. Pretty soon there's another church for people coming out of OCCC. That's cool. That's mission. And we got to start to think that way. So, achievers. Each believer is God's masterpiece designed for ministry. Ephesians 2:8-10, you know the scripture. The purpose of the church is to equip all the saints for the work of ministry. Ephesians 4:11-13. And then the forms, serving the 7 functions in Acts chapter 2, verses 41-47. I want to talk about those 2 last passages, because this is the strongest what we built our church on. If the purpose of the leadership of the church is to equip the saints for the works of ministry, the whole purpose of the church is not getting people saved. It's not preaching good sermons. It's equipping the saints to do the work of ministry and off campus, out there where they live. Am I making sense when I say that? So we would build everything around. If we're going to play softball, fine, but how can we tweak softball so that it's equipping people to do works of ministry? Whatever we do, how can we tweak it to get people doing works of ministry? As soon as you start to think that way, it changes the way that you do everything. And then serving the 7 functions, apostles' teaching, get this, apostles' teaching is number 1 in Acts 2. Number 2 is what? Prayer? Is that what it says? Fellowship. Then comes prayer. Then comes breaking of bread, which to me is eating food and Holy Communion. Then comes giving to one another. Then comes miracles. Then comes rejoicing. And then comes, if we're doing all these things real well, we're pretty healthy, and we're going to have favor with our neighbors. One of the problems that we have now with Gen Z is they don't like what they see as the church establishment. But the kind of churches that are funky and people getting along in smaller groups, they like. One of the tragedies of the day is I think we're going to have to move to a model where the church doesn't have to make budget. We're not trying to fully fund a pastor or fully fund a building. Ryan, wave at everybody. Stand up and wave at everybody. If you like what I'm about to say, go talk to him afterwards. They started a Bible study in a mixed martial arts studio. It's turned into a little church in the mixed martial arts studio. It doesn't have a budget because the guy, he discipled the guy who leads the studio to lead the church, and that's the church. Ryan moves up the hill to Sir Coffee in San Clemente, California, and starts Taco Tuesdays out of his own pocket. And he's a school teacher. And the young kids are coming, and he's teaching them, you could go start a church like this, 35 kids after the coffee shop's closed. You could start a church, and they're starting them all over California. At one point, before the fires, there were 3 in Malibu, behind the gate. If you got $1 million, you couldn't have gone into Malibu and started a church, a traditional church, but you certainly could go start one across from the gates in the coffee shop for free and then move it into the houses over there. We're going to have to look at church differently. We're going to have to look at function rather than form. We've taken a form that served well for a while, and we've almost made a sacrament out of it. We got to desacramentalize that thing and go, what's the function of a church, and how do we do that best in the world that is presented to us? And then go to the 2 slides later. Next slide, and then next, that one right there. So here's a couple things that I want to leave you with, and I'll quit talking. We need to prioritize disciple making over meeting making, because most of what we have been taught to do is make meetings. We need to make disciples, and then meetings have to follow. You have to have the meetings, but the importance is the disciple making. Equipping more of our members to do less of ministry. What am I talking about? Well, think about this. When I was young, I worked in a church. I was a youth pastor, and I was a Sunday school director in a church of 160 people in Granada Hills, California, in the San Fernando Valley. And we had a full-blown Sunday school, from cradle to the grave Sunday school. And so every Sunday, I hated Sunday mornings, because every Sunday morning, either early in the morning, which was better, or when I got to church, which was not better, somebody would tell me, I can't make it today. I can't teach my Sunday school class. Now, my job is to go find somebody on the fly who can teach that class. And this is why I didn't like it. People hated seeing me coming. You know, I got a little Sunday school book, and I'm coming after you, and you can see that I got a second grade class, and I'm going to hand you this, and you got about 12 minutes to figure out how you're going to teach these wiggly little boys from the Bible, because somebody wasn't able to make it. And so we thought, well, what can we do? So we stumbled into this. I wish I was smart, but I'm not. We stumbled into this. Let's break that class into 4 jobs. There's the person who teaches the lesson. There's the person who brings the paper, glue, and cotton balls so you can make sheep. You know what I'm talking about, right? Crafts, or the popsicle sticks, or whatever. There is the person who their job is to make friends with a little kid who's had a rough week and is messing up the class. Because sometimes you got a kid whose stepfather beat him up, or beat up his mother, and he acts out in class. So your job is to go sit next to that child, and if that doesn't work well, then take them outside and talk with them, and just be their friend. That's your job. And the 4th job is to hand out juice and cookies. So if the lesson teacher isn't there, everybody moves up. And so now the person who used to do crafts, they're going to teach the lesson that day. And they've been in it enough to know where the lesson's going. It's not that hard. And then what do you do when you get down to the juice passer out person? Well, you got 3 people who showed up that day, not the 4th. You go recruit one of your friends. And you're not asking them, can you come teach Sunday school? You're asking them, can you come hand out juice and cookies? And so what we did was, suddenly, I'm not the recruiter. We got all these recruiters, and we're not asking people to do a hard thing. We're asking them to do a little thing, and then we work our way up the ladder. Somebody moves to another state or whatever, well, everybody gets a promotion, and we bring another person to the bottom. So this idea, and we did this in mini church. We did this with ushering. We did this in, when you get to be a big church, especially the way we were in Hawaii, our parking was on 3 different levels, so we had to have people working the parking lots and stuff. So we get more of our members to do less of the ministry. Try to figure out how we could break every job into 4, and recruitment suddenly became easy. You'd think it'd make it harder, it made it easier. And then bring our people, and I'll end with this, bringing people face to face for more hours each year. I just ran across a study, I'm not even sure it's by Christians. I ran across 2 studies that I'm having to I'm buying some books. I'm buying the author's books. One said that 90% of the people in America say that they believe in God. There's 3 books. I read a book about near-death experiences. In that book, this guy teaches a secular university in Georgia, but he's a Christian. Teaches a philosophy of religion class as a Christian, and he presents in that class 17 arguments in favor of God. At the end of the class for several years, he's asked people, which argument was the most meaningful to you? He's got Muslims, Hindus, Christians, nominal Christians, and atheists in the classroom. The number 1 argument in favor of God was answered prayer. When I meet somebody who said they had a prayer answered, that makes me want to believe in God. The number 2 argument was these near-death experiences where they went through the tunnel, they saw the light and all that. The number 3 argument that made any sense was what they called deathbed experiences, where somebody's in the room, they're dying, but they didn't die and then come back, all that. And they're there and maybe they think they saw an angel talk to them. And non-believing people, this is what got their attention. The C.S. Lewis kind of stuff, the Josh McDowell stuff that I read all the time was way down the list. I just wrote a blog that's on Peyton's website that it just upended my apologetics. We got to pray with people who don't believe in Jesus, because then they start to believe in Jesus, and we can go from there. And so, but the last thing that I got into is this, that you become friends with people if you spend 50 hours with them. You become good friends if you spend 90 hours with them. And you don't get the best friend thing until you spend 200 hours together. I just came from a church that I left behind, and my job, I was coaching the pastor on how to do mini church and how to do exactly this, get people together face to face more. And we weren't making much progress. And so after 2.5 years, I quit that church, though I love that church and I love that pastor, but I'm almost 80, my wife is 80. We don't have 5 more years till you get to our needs are met, because we had no friends in the church after 2.5 years. Now, we had a lot of acquaintances. I was going to a life group, they called it, but that life group had well over 50 people attending, but there'd be about 30 every week. When you got 30 people, you cannot be intimate. You cannot have every member brings a psalm, a hymn, a teaching, a scripture. That cannot happen with 30 people. Here's what can happen. What was the first car that you drove in your life? What was your first car? What was your first car? What was your first car? You go all the way around the room and everybody tells them their first car. And they said, we are being intimate. We're getting people to share with each other. That's nonsense. That's just utter nonsense. And so I go to this church. Where the life group was held was at a guy's house that I knew. I had him over to my house for dinner. He didn't have me over to his house for dinner. In fact, he was on staff. He told me, in 15 years, you're the first person that's ever invited me to their house for dinner. And I would see that guy every Sunday. He would make it a point to come and say hi, or I'd make it a point to go say hi to him. But that's all we said was hi. How you doing? You know, the greeting thing. But that was it. We never got 50 hours out of 2.5 years. We just never got there. And so I wasn't his friend. I was his acquaintance. And he was the best acquaintance I had in the whole church. So one of the things that I want to leave with you is it's your job to figure out, how do I get more face time among the people who I'm trying to equip to do the ministry to other people. And whatever shape or form that takes, the function, not the form, whatever form is fine, the function is, how do I get these people with Jesus in the midst to have more face time with each other? And I'm done talking. And so if you got some questions or some comments or some, I hate that, don't say things like that, I'm up for it. Or if I've run out of time, I'm not sure which.
You're good. Anybody got questions?
What's your first car? My first car was a 1948 Plymouth that I bought for $50 in 1962. Chesley.
Is it a real question?
I just had a thought. I'd love you to riff on it. You're talking about building friendships, and the number 1A, 1B commandment is love your neighbor as yourself, and Jesus talks about agape love. My thought process is that they can't make it to agape until they go through phileo, like it's a progression.
Right.
Would you riff on that a little bit?
Totally. What is agape? Other than, sure, if there's an accident on the freeway and somebody's laying there bleeding, and I see it and I jump out of my car and go something to help, I can at that point, in an extreme circumstance, I can jump to agape love. But other than that, if I don't get through phileo, agape cannot possibly happen. And one of the best things that ever happened to me, I told you about when there was 80 people and there were 4 pastors, and I was upset about it. Well, one of them named Richard Agostino, and his father came from Italy, so he's got that kind of second generation thing, and he's ballistic and I'm not, and he's pushy and I'm not, and whatever. And I didn't really like him. And when he first came to the church, another guy brought him. Richard was leading a Bible study, and this other guy from the Bible study liked our church, so he dragged the whole group in. And it's like Richard didn't even want to be there. And so it's like, we're kind of like, And then he had a breakthrough. He had something spiritual happen. Because one night I went to a meeting, and he says, God told me that we're supposed to become best friends. We're going to become David and Jonathan. And you may know Richard. There was a guy named Rich Bueller, did a radio show in Orange County, and then when he died, Richard Agostino took his place. But Richard Agostino was the first daughter church from Hope Hermosa. And so Richard comes to me one night and says, God told me we're going to become best friends. We're going to become David and Jonathan. And my first response in my heart was, who's David and who's Jonathan? And that's serious. And I was driving another little British sports car. I had a little Triumph TR3 at the time, and they didn't have roll-up windows. They had side curtains you had to put in, so I didn't have the window in there. And the guy's first-generation Italian in America, he leaned in and kissed me on the neck. And it's like, ooh. But we started going to walking around the Palos Verdes golf course. Every Monday morning, we'd meet at 6 o'clock and walk around that golf course. And we went from strangers to not sure of each other to eventually phileo to eventually we had some people who lived, if you know Torrance, Hermosa Beach is Artesia Boulevard where we were. And they were in South Torrance, which was about 8 miles away, and there's no freeway there. The 405 turns inland. And so these people came to us. These are the days of Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And they said, we can't come Wednesday night. We'd like to come Sunday night, but we have little children. It's too hard. Could Rich Agostino come to one of our houses, and whatever you're teaching on in the church, he could teach on down there, and we could have Sunday night service. And so a little tiny group. So we, do that. Rich and I are meeting every week. So he comes to me after a couple months and says they want to become a church. They want to call it Branch of Hope. And there were several things wrong with that. One is our denomination. You can only have one church of that denomination in Torrance, California. I don't know why. There's 120,000 people, and 400 of them go to four square churches. Why do you not care about 119,000 people can go to hell? Something's wrong there. Second thing was you had to go to Bible college, and he hadn't gone to Bible college. And the third thing, I forget, there were three things that were wrong. And I didn't want him calling anything with the word hope in it, because I didn't want people, we've never tried to push that name, and I didn't want people thinking we're trying to start a little denomination. And so I told him, no, you can't do it. And so he was fine. And then a few weeks later, there's a wise man and prophet who invested a great deal of his time and energy in a guy named Mike Chong Perkinson and another guy named Ralph Moore. His name was Roy Hicks Jr. And he got me aside, and Mike would tell you, Roy could be very direct. And Roy prophesied to me, and he said, you need to understand it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Do it. So we did it. And I told Richard, go ahead and do it. We'll start the church. And I went to the denomination, and I do this kind of stuff sometimes. I go, the guy's name was Dr. Jones, and he was like a Pharisee. You had to, he'd make you sign all kind of things that you're not going to do this in your church. If you took over a church, it was crazy. But we're friends. So I went to him and I go, Dr. Jones, we did something I need to talk to you about. What'd you do? And I go, well, it was a good thing. Well, what'd you do? I go, well, we might have broken some of the bylaws, but we think it's okay. What did you do? And I kept this up for almost 5 minutes until he was begging me. And I told him what we did. We started a church, and the guy didn't go to Bible college, and it's a extra church in Torrance, and you have rules against that, all these different things. And he goes, you know my daughter? And I go, yeah. And he goes, I'm hoping that she gets married and gives me grandchildren someday. And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I can't tell her who to marry or where to get married or where to have kids or what to name the kids. And kind of the same thing. You just had a baby, and all I can do is say congratulations. And it was like, I expected to get told why I was wrong and all this. And here's what I found is religious establishments tend to make things get brittle and rulesy. But when something good happens at the bottom, religious establishments tend to bless them. They don't tend to crucify. They may have crucified Jesus, and they may have stoned some people down through the years, but religious establishments tend to see life where life is born, and there's a symbiosis there, a good thing. Thank you for asking that, Chesley. Anybody else?
Well, I just heard that you mentioned earlier that discipleship takes a long time. So my question is, what if either we don't have a lot of time, or if the person we're discipling doesn't have a lot of time?
Take as much time as you can. One of the things that I learned, and this is not Bible, this is just me. I'm always telling my wife this, just take what you can get. If it's a little bit snatches here and there, take it. And discipleship doesn't always take a long time. Don't make a rule out of what I said. But be willing to give it a long time. And by a long time, I mean 2 ways. Time over time, and then if I can meet with you for an hour and a half, or I can only meet you for 10 minutes, I'm going to take what I can get. And I'm going to do what I can with what I can get.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That was good.
Man, you're making me work.
So, Pastor Ralph, I think it was the earlier session you talked about you discipling about 9 people right now, or and then I think I heard you say like you have some questions that you usually ask them, something like that. So my question was like, what are some of those questions that you usually ask per people that you disciple?
Okay, before I answer that question, I want to tell you something else. It's a confession. It never dawned on me. These are pastors, right? So it's a little different than I'm meeting with somebody that I'm, that's growing up in the Lord. These are church planters. It never dawned on me to pray with them. And 2 meetings ago, we started asking, what do you need prayer for? And then we all commit to pray. And then we come back, and that has been so enriching in the relationship. It's been, and God's answered my prayers. I mean, it's really powerful. But I ask questions like, what's the greatest opportunity you face right now? What is a strange thing going on in your life and ministry that's strange to you that God may be doing? What's the worst problem that's facing you right now? That's how we ended up praying when I asked that question. So I asked, what are you reading, and why do you think the rest of us should read it? So don't tell me all the books you're reading. Tell me the book that you think the rest of us need. and tell me why you think we should read it. And so I just keep coming up with questions like that. I have found websites where you can ask questions for coaching, and I kind of go through some of those websites looking for those kind of questions. And in fact, if you email me at that address and tell me that you want a list, when I was in Hawaii last week, I go there twice a year. I go there in May for business on my way to Japan. And I go there in February on my airline miles that I've gotten over the years. And there's a lady I know who tried to rent her house out on Airbnb, and it didn't work very well. And so she rents it to friends and whatever. She lets me stay there for free. The first time in my life I've ever had that. I always have all these pastor friends who, oh yeah, this guy has a house in Big Bear and we use it every summer. And it's never happened to me ever. And so I this one, and it's in the rainiest part of Oahu you can imagine. It's so humid there, I hated it. But it's free still. Anyway, she had this little box of these questions. And it was all secular, but some were for family, some were for business, some whatever. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to buy that box. And my wife looked at the bottom of the box, it cost $35. So I went through it, and they're color coded, either yellow or blue or green, whatever there's. So it's random order, so I could take some out and just put them back in however I wanted. So I just went through and picked out all the ones that I'm going to give to him. And I'll give to you. If you email me that you want those questions, I'll give. So I went through and typed out all those questions. So I have a list of really good starters for conversation, because you know what, I can do this all day. If you guys want to stay here till 10 o'clock at night, I can just keep rattling on. But if you talk to me out there and I don't know you very well, I don't quite necessarily know what to say. I really am an introvert who's learned to talk publicly. And so if I don't know you, sometimes people think I'm rude because I'm so stupid. And so having these questions, my son actually pulled me aside last week. And he goes, Dad, all you ever, and he's a pastor too, all you ever want to talk about is church stuff, because that's all you know. He goes, but you know about cars? You like to travel? You've gone places. Why don't you talk about that kind of stuff? And he goes and asks other people questions like, I've been to, how many of you been to Mongolia? I love Mongolia. If my wife didn't have asthma, I would be living in Mongolia right now, because I love that more than anywhere on the planet. Well, that's a good conversation starter. What's Mongolia about? Or where did you travel? Those kinds of questions. So I have those questions. I can give them to you. I don't know how we're doing for time. I forgot the schedule.
One more question.
Okay. Two more questions.
Two more questions. You have a real question, Don?
My second car was...
This is my follow-up. Earlier, you were talking about ecclesial minimum worship, communitas, and mission, and the value of mission. What role in terms of a church health or church planting do you think that missions has? Churches get involved with a program or a missionary or a missions program somewhere. Can you speak to that in terms of a church relationship with missions and the value of having something like that, and at what point should you start it?
As fast as you can is the answer to the last part. But there was a guy named Gary Higa. I started Hope Hermosa in 1971. When I left that church in 1983, 12 years later, I was the 30th church planter to leave the church I planted. In 1983, we moved to Oahu. I lived in Kailua. The church was in Kaneohe. It rains 144 inches a year where we ended up with our church property. That's a lot. It rains 18 inches a year in LA, right? So we didn't go there because it's Hawaii. We went there because I saw a vision. The book Let Go of the Ring talks about this. I saw a vision on an airplane, or I would have never left Southern California. And I never liked Hawaii as well as I like Southern California, largely because of humidity. Anyway, so I pastored that church for 27 years. When I handed off to the next generation, we moved to a movie theater, actually in an expensive neighborhood, but we weren't reaching those people. They were rich people, and we were too middle class. They'd come once or twice, but we weren't reaching them. We're at the end of a freeway, which was, we could get the whole island from the freeway. And there's a guy named Gary Higa who was working with homeless people. And he was just taking care of people. He was shepherding them. It wasn't like a church thing. He wasn't trying to bring the word into it. He'd bring food, he'd bring medicine, he'd take people for rides to doctors. So right away we saw he's our missionary to that community. And Hawaii's the worst for homeless in America. There's way more homeless per capita in Hawaii than California. It's weather. California's the second worst, and it's because of the sunshine. Anyway, we started having people go out on Saturday nights with Gary, and without asking help, ladies started making peanut butter sandwiches. People started going to Costco and buying crates of water, and they just go down through Chinatown, through where a lot of the homeless were. Well, then some of our guys started planting churches among homeless people. Now we're planting what we call real, like legacy churches throughout the island, and we're doing an eyeglass ministry in Kenya. That was another mission, because we had an eye doctor in the church. We'd go collect. People give their prescription glasses to their doctor when they're done with them, and the doctor doesn't know what to do with them. But we found boxes of them all over the island, and some guy had a thing that could read the prescription. So they would take the glasses and they'd go to Kenya and they'd do an eyeglass clinic, and then they'd share the Lord. And they'd come back. Every 2 years we did this. 800 people accepted Jesus, 700 people. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're just going to the same town and the same recycled converts. They never went to the same town twice. And they taught a guy there, little church, how to do mini church and how to use mini church to train up pastors. And that guy started planting churches. And so when we saw mission, we tried to not, it was a fallback to us to hook up with a missions organization. It was, we can't find something else to do, so we'll do this. We want something that has to do with these people in this community that's outside of us. Or you got a cousin in Iran, and we can figure out a way to get some things to Iran. Those are the kinds of things that we would do when we talk about mission. Last question.
Awesome. One more.
Thank you. I guess kind of going back to the point regarding acquaintances but no friends. I guess it's kind of a general question, but I suppose at what point should you consider leaving a church if you're just with acquaintances? I guess a good example is, should it be if you've made every effort to connect with people, or should that be contingent on the fact if they've reached out to you? Because as a young man aspiring for ministry, I think the younger generation mentality is always, I would do it if they do it for me, as opposed to like, I'm willing to go out. But at what point is continuing to persist on the matter just kind of relevant?
I can only give you my experience. How long do I have to answer this question? Can I take 5 minutes? Okay. I moved here 7 years ago. And I moved in January, and some friends were starting a church, a kid who grew up in my house, kind of. My son ran a mini church in my house, so Drew Tevis grew up in my house, kind of, in Hawaii. And they were planting Aloha Church in Mission Bay High School in September. I'm here in January. So I can't commit to any church. So I went visiting a large non-church, 4,500 people, in a nearby town. And they had Friday night services. There would be 1,000 people Saturday nights, Friday nights. And I went very critical because I had been a pastor for too long, so you're bound to be looking, But there's no Bible teaching. It's very shallow. And then they did the singing after that. They'd sing one song, and they have the Bible teaching, and they do the singing. And the singing looked like a show to me. And then on the way in the building, I would park. I'm a nerd, I'm an introvert. I'd park in the street. I wouldn't go in the parking lot. But as I walked on the property, somebody would shake my hand and go, "Welcome to such and such." And then I'd get into the courtyard. Somebody shook my hand, "Welcome to such and such." I won't name it. And then I'd go in the doorway, "Welcome to such and such." And then I'd get through the lobby to the front door. They hand me a bulletin and say, "Welcome to such and such." And then they'd all go, the whole thing, stand up, turn around, and shake somebody's hand. They would do that. They would sit down. Nobody talked to me. So I got three things against this group of people. There's no friendship. There's no worship. It's singing. It's performing, actually. People didn't even sing. It's performing. And I hate the guy talking. It's shallow. So I had been to a Bob Dylan concert just before I left Hawaii. And I realized after about 3 weeks, I went there 7 weeks. After about the third week, it dawned on me, they don't talk to each other. It's not just me they don't like. They don't like each other. They don't know each other. They don't talk to each other. It's no different other than there's no smell of marijuana in the air than going to what I went to with the Dylan thing. So that seventh week, I remember this because my last night there. The pastor gets up, good news, stop giving money. We're going to rebuild the courtyard, several $1 million, which they're not using. There's no fellowship. We're putting all kind of food out there, doing anything we can to get people to talk to each other. We're just doing barrel rolls backwards to get people to make friends. They're doing none of that. But they've raised $2.5 million. Don't give any more money. Isn't this good news? And everybody's cheering. It's wonderful. And then he kind of starts to muse a little bit, and he goes, I never said this before, but I really only exist for people who have known Jesus for less than 5 years. In fact, I can prove it. If you've been in this church for less than 5 years, stand. If you've been here longer than 5 years, stay seated. Everybody stand up that's been here less than 5 years. There was nobody seated. Everybody stood out, 1,000 people. I didn't see a single person. It should have been probably some, but I didn't see him. And so I realized he's not trying to teach the Bible. He's not trying to equip the saints. He's trying to get people more saved. They don't do disciple making. He's actually trying to disciple people into Christ every week when he preaches or whatever you call that. Then the guy doing the guitar thing, he gets up and tells us, since he told his story, I want to tell you how I feel, and I had this dream of going to Nashville, and I went to Nashville and I cut an album, and it just never sold, and so now I'm just stuck doing this gig. And I grabbed my wife and we walked out. And I want you to know, no guilt. The first few weeks I feel guilty because I'm such a jerk judging these people. Now it's like no guilt. So then I go from there to Skyline Church, which is where I attend now. Those people talk to each other, but none of them talk to me. And I reached out, and I went there 3 weeks, and it didn't produce anything. I go there now, and instantly it's all different now. It's the most loving, wonderful group of people. It's just amazing to me. I love it. But I've only been there for maybe 6 weeks, but instantly I got friends. So then I went to Shadow Mountain Church. What's David Jeremiah? And now it's getting close to September when the new church is going to start, and so I'm hiding. So I go sit in the balcony, and when they're going to pray for people to receive the Lord, I'm sneaking out. And, I probably look like some warmed-over atheist or something. I'm ducking out. And I swear to you, I only went 3 times. Every single time, there was some other old geezer different one each time, have his arm around me walking down the stairs while I'm sneaking out of church, inviting me to some fellowship, to some something, to some. That church was aces at it. I mean, it was. I live 2 miles from Skyline. Otherwise, I'd probably be going over there. But I go to Skyline first week. So here's the deal. I go to my church I'm used to, and I had been asked by the pastor to disciple somebody. So I'm going home early tomorrow because I'm discipling this couple, and start what I call a mini church, and partly to teach the church this is how to do this, because we've done it so successfully. And we used it as a training ground to breed pastors. And then I'd been asked by it was called life groups, by my life group leader, the 50 people thing, can you shrink this group by taking some of those people to your new thing? Right? So now the pastor's asked me, the pastor of this thing has asked me. So we did. We started asking some of the old geezers to come to the thing. First we were doing it at our house, and then we moved it. And somebody got mad at my wife because she'd invited these people. And then they apologized pretty quickly. My wife apologized to them, then they apologized, whatever. Well, then those people that she had invited stopped talking to us. And they had been our acquaintances before. And so one Sunday, I'm just telling you the truth, right? So I'm just sitting there, and one of those couples that we had invited walked by, and I go, hi. And they go, hi. And they went wherever they were going. It was quite a distance. And the church is 2 buildings with a big courtyard in between. On the way back, they walked up to the perimeter by the edge of the property and walked around so they wouldn't have to talk to us. So I'm standing there at the door of the service. They have like 3 services. I'm standing at the door waiting to go in. My wife's gone to the bathroom. She comes up, and I go, you know what? Nobody talked to us today. And already I don't like that they sing. They sing God give me songs instead of God I love you songs. I already don't like that. I'm judging. I sin every week. I mean sin, too. I ain't kidding. So anyhow, that's going on. The singing's going on. She shows up. I go, you know what? Let's just go visit Skyline. It's by our house. It can't be any worse than this. We don't know anybody here. So we go to Skyline. As I'm walking up the hill, I hear How Great Thou Art to a big rock and roll band. And that's what we're used to. We rock and roll church, right? And it's like, oh, this feels like heaven. I'm late already. Then I get in. It's a very worshipful song. The leader sounds like Bono, and I'm a U2 freak. And I mean, they don't even have the drums muffled. They're banging it. It's going for it. And I'm just going, this is really great. I wonder what their small groups are like. So there's one in my neighborhood. I go there. It's crowded. The house isn't suited for it very well. It's poorly run. But I walked away from there actually feeling I had 3 people who, in a night, I could say, I think that's my friend. It was crazy. And this was, and I hate the idea that they do it for 10 weeks and then quit, because that was their last night. And then they quit and all that. Well, then my wife fell and broke her femur 2 days before her birthday. This was in November. And we went through a lot of crazy stuff with that. But anyway, the leaders of that group, they're both from Manila. My wife's half Filipino. They came to our house. They spent 2 hours and a half at our house. And we'd only been with them one time. I mean, this is amazing. This is church to me. This is when church. And I met this lady. Her name is Pam. She's quite pretty. She's in her 80s. She has a little Alzheimer's. She comes in and out. She grew up in the town we lived in Hawaii, but she'd left there 10 years before us. I met her husband. He wants to teach me apologetics. I sat with him one night. It's like, oh my goodness, I get all this stuff. But he's a nice guy. He was an accountant. It turns out he's into old cars and motorcycles. He even bought an old airplane. And he invited me to this Tuesday morning dorky, weird breakfast thing. There's these people, they own a golf shop, and they own an art store, and I don't know how they sell any of that stuff. But in the back, out of their own pocket, they make breakfast. They get up at like 4 in the morning and make breakfast for about 40 people. And some of them are so old and doddery they can, hardly get around. And some of them are like 60 years old. And this guy, the accountant guy who wants to teach apologetics, invited me to that. And I went one time. And again, I made immediately, these are friendly people. I think it has to start with the pastor. If the pastor is friendly and making friends and demands it of the staff, that's another thing. The guy was coaching. I still am coaching him. He doesn't know how to demand stuff of his staff. They don't do performance reviews. See, I bring these kind of things into performance reviews. Who did you spend time with this week? What did you talk about this week? Who are they spending time with? And you're going to get pay raises depending on this. It's not going to depend on other kind of, that other stuff that we all do, that'll do that too. But I bring this into it. So I would come back to your question, because I'm taking a long way with this. You better give it everything you got. And then you better leave as fast as you can if it doesn't work. But if you haven't given it all you have, 2.5 years, I gave it everything I had. I can live with a clear conscience. But if you didn't give it everything you have, and they reached out to you, then you didn't do your thing. And, and I'll quote this. Don't let the old people, young people thing mess you up. You have a lot. How old are you? 28. Yeah. You have a lot to learn from some of these gentlemen here who've got gray hair or no hair. But they have a lot of wisdom, and you need it. So,
Put your hands together for Ralph Moore. Thanks, Ralph. You're awesome. So awesome. Hey, let's take 10 minutes, just 10. There's 3 questions that Ralph asked. We're just going to take a look at 2. So what did the Spirit say to you this afternoon that you heard, and what are you going to do about it? And just take a moment and then share that in your groups, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and I'll introduce you to Doug Hutchison.